This is the first time Hatikva was ever played in Bahrain. And again, it's interesting because of the discipline of the Arab Muslim band that plays. They take it seriously and they do it respectfully, etc. And this is with Prime Minister Bennett was standing there at the time. In February 1946, there was the Battle of Castina, or Krav Castina. We've been covering to a great degree how the Irgun and the Lechi blew up British military buildings, officers' clubs. They blew up the headquarters of the British. We covered the Akko prison fortress break. Here's another kind of attack they did. The British had warplanes stationed in Israel, partly for whatever defense reasons in Israel, and partly because they were at war with the Germans. And then even after World War II, they continued stationing military aircraft in Israel, what they called Palestine. In Krav Castina, the Irgun did a daring underground raid where in the middle of the night, they broke into the British military air base undetected, and they brought ample hand grenades. And they blew up an entire squadron of British planes on the ground. Lead, metal flying all over the place. And it really was impossible more and more for the British to stay in Palestine for their own purposes. The daily video reels that they were seeing back in London and elsewhere in England, watching their buildings get blown up, their soldiers getting their clubs and their military headquarters and their police stations, bank robberies and police being held up and rifles and guns and pistols being taken out of police headquarters to be used by the Lechi and the Irgun. It really started breaking the British spirit. That's not what colonialism was supposed to be. The idea was supposed to be, we, the British, are in charge. We are there to tell the Jews what to do. We're not there to have them blowing us all over the place. And then when the Irgun started whipping them in retaliation for the lashings, and then, of course, the hangings, when the Irgun said, if you hang any more of our people, we're going to start hanging your people. And they actually did it the very next day. It really started becoming increasingly impossible for the British in their own minds to continue to, they were no longer like a world power. This song is sung by 2 or 3 elderly gentlemen, so it may not be as impressive. I don't, let me see which version I have. It's the Song of Christina, the Song of the Battle. Now, what you should know about this song is that the words were written by Michael Ashbel, who also wrote the Irgun anthem. That song, Hayom Sarah Haktana, Nipared Bitseti La Milchama, Et Hamdina Lechonen, Nishte Gadot HaYarden, Gisizit Saratech, Vichigri Et Chagoratech, Chapkini Kechi Mikla V'iti Lashra, Ale Barikadot, Nipagesh. That song was written by Michael Ashbel. He also wrote this song that I'm going to play now about the battle. The meaning of the words is that at the middle of the night, the unit marches secretly into the battle, into the field. They see the birds of lead or of steel, namely the planes. They're given the command to go forward. And so they march forward. And they throw their grenades and fire an explosion all over the place with lead flying everywhere. And then the men of the battalion or the unit proudly march back home, knowing that the only way to free this land is bitat b'mikla u'berimon, with a gun, with bullets, and with grenades. Ashbel, who wrote those two songs, was among the members of the Irgun who died, were killed during the course of the Akko prison break that we studied last week. His wife, or his girlfriend actually, then married another member of his unit, just as the lyrics of the song Hayom Sarah Haktana urge his wife, V'im bitliya emsoret chayai le'uma al na tivki pikach nigza gorali mechidimatech v'chigriat chagoratech. Then it's mixing the two stanzas. And so he says, pick another Bachri Ish Echad Me Gundati. He urges that she should marry someone else from his unit if he dies. And so she married Eitan Livni, and they had, as I taught you earlier in an earlier class, their daughter Tzipi Livni became a prime minister of Israel. So he wrote the lyrics to this song, Krav Kastina. These three guys, now they're older, and they're talking about the battle that took place. That's quite a thing to see guys who one night were sneaking in the middle of the night, blowing up airplanes, and 40 years later, what's that thing about old soldiers never die, they just fade away? So in Israel, old soldiers never die, they just become singers. and in little musical rock bands. So we move now from our study of the Irgun to the Lechi, Avraham Stern. And let's take it to the next step. There's my passport. I don't know. Forgot to take that down. Let's find the, okay, this will just take me one moment to get this word up. I'll get disconnected for a second and I'll be right back. It's just, sorry, I thought I had to. Okay, there's that. Now we get back here. Now we go here. Did that work? Okay. Just come on. Well, until I'm able, let me try it one more time. I prepared some really good material. Otherwise, I will. I'll read it. Let me see if I can just figure out how to quickly bring up the word material that I had prepared. Teaching legacy. Okay, let's start with that. Yeah, here we go. So we have covered the Irgun break out of the Akko fortress. We did that last week. And then we covered that in retaliation for the British hanging Irgun troops, the Irgun started hanging Britons. And that's July 47. Within months, Britain had had enough and they left. You know that the war, you know, the UN recognized a Jewish state November 29, 1947. Just 3-4 months later, the British basically said, we've had it. We're handing it over to the UN. We don't want it anymore. You may even remember last week we saw one of the videos out of England where the tone of the video itself changed as they were showing more Irgun explosions, and the narrator saying it's time for America and the United Nations to get involved. The British, after this, they couldn't handle it anymore. They got sick of it. Shmuel Katz, who was a leading spokesman of the Irgun and later became director of communications under Prime Minister Menachem Begin 30 years later, he issued a statement: we recognize no one-sided laws of war. If the British are determined that their way out of the country should be lined by an avenue of gallows and of weeping fathers, mothers, wives, and sweethearts, we shall see to it that in this there is no racial discrimination. The gallows will not be all of one color. Their price will be paid in full. And so they just couldn't stop the Irgun. And that, of course, was the King David Hotel, where the entire military command for Palestine was based, including all their secret files and documents. And we just heard the song of the Battle of Castina. This was Menachem Begin when he was the commander of the Irgun. And this is Menachem Begin 30 years later, and when he was Prime Minister of Israel. And we've seen him. And we now move to the Lechi. The Lechi was called by those who opposed them the Stern Gang, or the Stern Group. It was founded by Avraham Stern. Lechi stands for the letters Lamed Chet Yud, Lochamei Cherut Yisrael. Lechi, Lochamei Cherut Yisrael, freedom fighters for Israel. This was their logo, their oath, the Lechi. Avram Stern's views had become much more militant following the Arab riots of 1929. We saw and learned about that. The Hebron riots. Became an active member of the Irgun. He took on the underground name of Yair in memory of the zealots at Masada. The leader was Eliezer ben Yair. In 1934, he was sent by the Irgun on missions to Poland. Now remember, the Nazis invaded and took over Poland in 1939. Yair Stern had an incredible relationship with the government of Poland, as we're going to learn now. And until the Nazis took over, Poland was a major supplier of weapons for the Irgun. The government of Poland. In 1934, Stern was sent by the Irgun on missions to Poland and other European countries to purchase weapons and arrange for their shipment to Israel. In 1935, he obtained the first two Finnish submachine guns, shipping them in double-sided boilers. Other weapons were transported in suitcases and crates belonging to immigrants. He regarded the British more than the Arabs as the primary enemy of the Jews. He advocated armed struggle against the British. He wrote the poem Chayalim Almonim. We've learned that. Chayalim Almonim, anonymous soldiers. Stern concluded an agreement with the Polish government in 1938. The weapons were transferred under Polish army supervision to Irgun warehouses in Warsaw and then shipped to Eretz Yisrael. At the same time, he was involved in illegal immigration, helping smuggle Jews in. In 1937, following the Arab riots, Stern went to Poland to establish Irgun training courses. At the beginning of 1938, these courses were aimed at equipping 40,000 fighters with the agreement of the Polish government, who had come to Israel. He concluded an agreement with the Polish government that accelerated arms acquisitions, but unfortunately, the Nazis invaded Poland, and that was the end of that. On the eve of World War II, Stern was arrested by the British, and he stayed in jail till June 1940. He ultimately became very upset when the Irgun called a suspension in their attacks against the British as World War II began. At the outset of World War II, the Irgun felt, with the British fighting Hitler, we should not be fighting the British. The Irgun rapidly changed their position, as we have learned, while the Haganah stuck with it. But Stern was upset right away when the Irgun ceased attacks on the British, and he formed a splinter group. It was called Tzva'i Leumi, later renamed Lochamei Cherut Yisrael, the Lechi, and the opponents called it the Stern Gang. The Irgun had begun broadcasting from a shortwave transmitter. Lechi took possession of the transmitter after Stern split from the Irgun, and he started a radio station, Voice of Fighting Zion. And we learned how they changed the station every day. The frequency constantly changed, and if you wanted to find them, you had to listen for their anthem, Chayalim, Almonim, etc. He launched attacks against the British police and soldiers, and they responded violently, killing several Lechi members and wounding and arresting many others. Stern maintained that even in the face of the Nazi threat, it was the British who posed the greatest danger. Remember, the British, number one, had truncated the land of Israel by 77%. Number two, they had closed off the ports and prevented ships from bringing in hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions died, because even though they could have gotten out of Nazi Europe, they couldn't get in anywhere. England wouldn't let them in. Roosevelt wouldn't let them in. The one place they could have gone, Palestine, the British wouldn't let them in. Thirdly, the British were not defending properly, were not protecting Jews from Arab marauders and pogromists and massacres, yet the British were attacking and arresting and even hanging Jews whom they found with armed weapons. And fourthly, the British suppressed basic Jewish rights, such as banning Jews from blowing the shofar at the Kotel. They had to be thrown out. And that was Stern's philosophy. Eventually, the British put a reward on Stern's capture, wanted posters, all over the country with a price on his head. He had to wander from safe house to safe house in Tel Aviv, carrying a collapsible suitcase, a cot in a suitcase. When he ran out of hiding places, he slept in apartment house stairwells. Eventually, he moved into an apartment rented out by Moshe and Tova Sforai, who are members of the Lechi. But Sforai was caught by British detectives who raided another apartment where two Lechi members were shot dead. And Sforai and another were hospitalized. His Stern's contact, Chassia Shapiro, thought she might have been followed one morning by British officers when she would bring messages. And a couple of hours later, British detectives arrived to search the apartment and discovered Avraham Stern hiding there. was the mother of one of the Lechi members who inadvertently led the police to Stern's hiding place. Tovas Varai was taken away so that Stern was left alone with 3 armed British policemen. The British handcuffed him and then shot him in the back in the apartment. That building is now a museum of the Lechi. He was an underground fighter, had broken away from the Irgun, which had broken away from the Haganah, and the Lechi did incredibly daring and outrageous things. At the time he was condemned, today he is regarded as a national hero of Israel. They've issued a postage stamp in his memory. I mean, it's a guy gives his life not for a postage stamp. This is not like the movie Fargo where the guy's painting a bird to get a 3-cent stamp. But the postage stamp represents that the nation recognized him, after all is said and done, as a national hero of historic proportions. These were the British want ads. These are the signs that they had out for Lechi members. This is a memorial to Stern, Yair Avraham Stern. This is the building where Stern was murdered by the British, now a Lechi museum. Ba'bayit hazeh, ba'aliyat hagag, b'yom chafei b'shvat, tovshin chaf. In this building, basically on the top floor, on the 25th day of Shabbat, that's January or so, or February, 5720, nirtzach al yedei shlichei hashilton hazar. He was murdered by representatives of the alien government, Yair, who Avraham Stern, Rishon Lochamei Cherut Yisrael, the leader of the Lechi. Mibayit zeh horishit sava milchama lecherut hamoledet. From this house went forth the decree to start the war to free the homeland. Years later, a memorial on his day of being assassinated, 25th of Shvat, the day of memory, L'chalalei Lechi, and it was a day of memory in memory of all those of the Lechi who were killed in their battles with the British. Giborei Lochamei Cherut, the heroes of the War of Independence. B'yom chafei b'shvat tavshin chaf, on the 25th day of Shvat in 5720, nafal mikadurei hashilton hazar. He fell from the bullets of the alien government, Yair. Michalel milchemet hacherut ha'ivrit, v'yishon tafkidei mipakdei Lochamei Cherut Yisrael. And again, all the others who fell for the Lechi, fighting with the Lechi. Kavod l'zichram, may we honor their memory. And so here you have a public event in Nachalat Yitzchak in his memory. After he died, it took three people to take over. The leader among the 3 was Yitzchak Shamir. We'll get to Shamir more in a moment. First, more about Yair. Here was a man, I want to emphasize, and you're going to see this in this video. It's kind of amazing if you think about it. Imagine it's the 1940s, and you have these underground organization blowing up British police officers, blowing up their buildings, blowing up their police stations, blowing up the army offices, sneaking into airports, blowing up airplanes, shootouts in the middle of the street midday, and the Haganah is attacking them. The Haganah of the labor government, David Ben-Gurion, Yitzhak Rabin, they're calling them outrageous people, terrorists. The British, of course, they won't even call them Lechi, they call them the Stern Gang. And now 40 years later, the state of Israel, by the mid-1980s, the prime minister of Israel is Yitzhak Shamir, who was the second head of the Stern Gang, of the Lechi. After the fall of Yair, Yitzchak Shamir, and here's what the Israeli Department of Education, the government. I mean, I don't know. I'll leave it up to you to decide what the United States Department of Education does. But here's what the Israeli Department of Education was doing.
Stern, also known as Yair, was the founder and leader of the Zionist underground, later known as Lechi. Lechi was founded in 1940. It split off from the Irgun when the Irgun joined forces with Haganah to support the British in their fight against the Nazis. Stern rejected collaboration with the British and claimed that only a continuing struggle against them would eventually lead to an independent Jewish state and resolve the Jewish situation in the diaspora. British restrictions after 1939 on Jewish immigration, Aliyah, to the land of Israel strengthened his convictions in this regard. Yair, who was also a poet, was killed in 1942 by British police, shot from behind, having already been handcuffed. The Defense Ministry held a special contest for young boys and girls, testing their knowledge of Yair's heritage and legacy. 100 years after the birth of Avraham Yair Stern, young boys and girls from throughout Israel came to participate for the first time ever in a quiz on the legacy and writings of the Lechi commander. More than 300 kids participated in the initial tests. The top 35 were acquitted to take part in the final stages of the contest.
I mean, is this great? Is this great that the Defense Ministry is teaching to have, like, just like America, we just had last week, a spelling bee. As you know, spelling bees basically are, in America, serve two purposes. They show how incredibly bad American education, public school education is, and they show how good it is in India. Anyway, so if you take a look, can you imagine? You've got a national education program in the high schools and elementary schools teaching kids about the legacy of Yair, and it culminating in a test where kids compete for prizes. How much do you know about Yair?
This topic interests me very much. I've learned about it since 4th grade. When my father and I went to the museum, we saw the ad for the contest, and it interested me, and I went to do the test. We asked questions about his life, the operations that his organization carried out, fighting against the British, trying to drive them out of the land of Israel, and struggling to establish a Jewish state. I learned from this about heroism of people who cared. They were not egotistic. Nowadays, we speak to the youth a lot. We meet soldiers as well. When we see paratroopers that are ours, and youth that is ours, we think that if we would have known back then that this is actually going to happen, it would have given us such motivation. Not that we were missing any motivation, thank God.
The Lechi veterans joined the event. They didn't compete with the kids on the knowledge of Lechi history, rather saw with their own eyes how their actions became a legend to inspire.
After 60 years, to see this wonderful youth that comes and shows interest and knows about the Lechi heritage. We were criticized, slandered, and libeled for years, and so it's a great pleasure to see this. They are the new generation that will work for the true independence of the nation and the state. They will not let anyone give up parts of the land of Israel. It's the beginning of the days of Mashiach, to see youth like this. After all that we went through, they call us insane, dreamers, delusional. To now see that the state was established, the face of the state today is not as I expected. Nevertheless, if we are able to bring youth like this here, there is still hope for the nation of Israel.
people who want freedom from the occupator. They don't have money in most of the cases. We had to steal goods. We had no other chance to get money for continuing the fight. This looks like my mugshot taken by the police, but actually it was taken in the prison as part of a plan to make false identification papers we could use in a breakout of the prison. All that reminds of that plan is this photo alone, because it wasn't carried out. She waited for 5 years until I was released.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Let's just move that out. Okay. Continuing now, first of all, for Yitzchak Shamir, who became the next commander of the Lechi. Yitzchak Yezernitsky, later Yitzchak Shamir, was born in the Jewish shtetl of Ruzhani, later moved to Bialystok, studied at Hebrew High School. He joined Beitar. That was the youth movement founded by Jabotinsky that fed into the Irgun and Lechi. Beitar existed all over Europe, in Jewish countries, in cities, communities, ranging from Russia to Germany to Italy to you name it, all of France. Jewish nationalist young people who supported Jabotinsky's concept of fighting back to liberate the country joined Beitar, and many of them moved to Israel to join the Irgun and the Lechi. He studied law at the University of Warsaw, but he cut his studies short to emigrate to Eretz Yisrael. His parents and two sisters were murdered in the Holocaust. Shamir's father was killed just outside his birthplace by villagers who had been his childhood friends after he had escaped from a German train transporting Jews to the death camps. His mother and his sister were murdered in the concentration camps, and another sister was shot dead. When Shamir's father was informed that the extermination of Jews was imminent, he replied, "I have a son in the land of Israel, and he will exact my revenge." In 1935, Shamir reached Israel. He married Shalomit 10 years later, whom he met in a detention camp after the ship on which she sailed to mandate Palestine from Bulgaria was declared illegal by the British, and all the people on that ship were sent into a detention camp. He joined the Irgun. When the Irgun split in 1940, Shamir joined the Lechi. He was imprisoned by the British in 1941. A few months after Avraham Stern was killed by the British in 1942, Shamir, still in prison, hid under a stack of mattresses in a warehouse of the detention camp, and at night escaped through the barbed wire fences of the camp Shamir became the leader of the Lechi and reorganized it into cells. In 1943, he became one of its 3 leaders. He sought to emulate the anti-British struggle of the Irish Republicans, that is, the Irish Republican Army, who fought to drive the British out of Ireland. And he took the name Michael as an underground name. You know, Avraham Stern had taken the underground name Yair. He took the name Michael after Irish Republican Army leader Michael Collins. Some of you may have seen the movie starring Liam Neeson, the movie Michael Collins, about the Irish effort to throw the British out of Ireland. Shamir plotted the 1944 assassination of Lord Moyne. This was one of the 2 most daring and significant attacks by the Lechi: the assassination of Lord Moyne and the assassination of Count Folke Bernadotte, both of which we're going to learn, some today, some next week. Lord Moyne was the British Minister for Middle East Affairs, not only for Palestine, but also for, let's say, Egypt. In fact, he was based in Cairo. His headquarters were in Cairo. It was he, Lord Moyne, who gave the orders to seal off the harbors and keep out the ships. He was an architect of British restrictions on Jewish immigration, and in particular, he was blamed for the Patria disaster. That was the ship that blew up in Haifa when the British would not allow the people in. That was Lord Moyne, who was a lifelong friend of Winston Churchill. Churchill regarded Lord Moyne not just as an important member of his cabinet, assigned to be in charge of Middle Eastern affairs, but Churchill regarded Lord Moyne as one of his closest advisors. Shamir personally planned and gave the order to assassinate Moyne and personally selected Eliyahu Hakim and Eliyahu Beit Suri to carry it out. And they did. The assassination of Lord Moyne shook Winston Churchill. We'll come back to Shamir in a moment. Eliyahu Beit Suri and Eliyahu Hakim, the 2 who assassinated Lord Moyne. And how are these assassins remembered today? An Israeli postage stamp was issued. It's like almost unbelievable. It's unbelievable how they all, again, a postage stamp is a postage stamp. And then they change the amount of postage and you need the 3-cent stamps. But these are national heroes today. They are remembered as heroes. They assassinated, this was Lord Moyne. He did not allow Jews into Haifa harbor, Jews fleeing from the Nazis in Bulgaria, Poland, Hungary, Germany. He didn't let the Jews, but he had no problem motorboating in the waters. This is Lord Moyne. He was assassinated. And that's his funeral. Beit Suri pressed his commanders to be sent on a mission to assassinate Lord Moyne. Although he lacked operational experience, it was judged that his dedication and determination would compensate. He was sent to Cairo along with Eliyahu Hakim to carry out the assassination. Moyne arrived in his car with his army driver, his secretary, and his aide-de-camp. The ADC went to open the front door of the residence, and the driver got out to open the door for Moyne. Hakim pulled the car door open and shot Moyne 3 times, while Beit Suri shot and killed the driver. The 2 fled on their bicycles, pursued by an Egyptian motorcycle policeman. They were captured and surrounded by an angry mob until they were extracted by the police. Moyne died that evening. There's a museum that commemorates the scene. That's a figurine of Lord Moyne where he was shot. And that's Beit Suri at the car shooting the aide-de-camp. At the trial, Beit Suri gave a speech. We do not recognize England's right to give us Palestine or take it away from us. Let me make this clear to the court. We are not fighting to uphold the Balfour Declaration. We're not fighting for the sake of the national home. We're fighting for freedom. In our country, a foreign power rules. Millions sank in the sea of blood and tears, but the British skipper did not lift them to the ship. And if a few survivors held on to the bow of the ship, the British skipper pushed them back into the sea. And we in our homeland had no choice but to surrender or fight. We chose to fight. He and Hakim were sentenced to death. They were hanged in Cairo in March 1945, singing Hatikva from the gallows. 30 years later, in 1975, Egypt duly returned the remains. Remember, they did the assassination in Cairo, hanged in Cairo, buried in Cairo. Egypt duly gave their remains 2 years after the Yom Kippur War. As part of a negotiation after the Yom Kippur War, they were holding some Israelis. Israel was holding their prisoners of war from the Yom Kippur War. A year and a half after the Yom Kippur War, Egypt duly gave their remains to Israel. Israel demanded they would not return those 20 to 25 Arab prisoners of war without the return of Hakim and Beit Suri, who then were interred on Mount Herzl, which is like Arlington National Cemetery in the United States. The highest honor for military fighters is to be buried in Mount Herzl. Jabotinsky is buried in Mount Herzl. Others, and these are their gravestones. Eliyahu Beit Suri, and the logo of the Lechi, Ben Esther Umosha, etc. Allah Lagardom Bakahir. He died on the gallows in Cairo. Chaver Lechi, a member of the Lechi, Lochamei Cherut Yisrael. And Eliyahu Hakim, same logo, Ben Pauline V'Shimon HaKohen. Nolad B'Lebanon, he was born in Lebanon. And he made Aliyah in Tafresh Tzadi Gimel in 5693. Chaver Lechi, a member of Lechi, he too, Allah Lagardum Bakahir, he went to the gallows in Cairo. Upon his hanging, the hanging of Betsuri and Hakim, the Lechi posted posters all over Israel. Eliyahu Hakim ve'Eliyahu Beit Suri Lochamei Cherut, hu alu Lagardom Bakahir, b'Yom Hei Nisan Tavshin Hei. Eliyahu Hakim and Eliyahu Beit Suri, fighters for freedom, went to their deaths on the gallows in Cairo on Thursday, on the 5th day of Nisan, 5705. Psak hadin ushar v'hutza lapoel al yedei shiltonot Mitzrayim. The decree of judgment was authorized and certified by the Egyptian government, tachat lachatzam shel Churchill, under Churchill's pressure. V'hashiltonot habritim me'Anglia b'mandat hatichon u'be'eretz Yisrael. They were executed by a British decree issued under pressure from Churchill and from the British English government in the Middle East. Milchamala am ha'evri b'mishabdei moladeto. And this war is going to continue against those who are enslaving us. Kivod u'tehilat olam legiborei ha'moledet. May they have eternal praise and honor, these heroes of the homeland, shemasru nafsham b'melchemet ha'cherut, who gave their lives for the fight of freedom. Lochamei Cherut Yisrael, and that's the Lechi. This poster was printed not in Jerusalem, not in Tel Aviv. It was printed b'Machteret B'Tzion. It was printed in the Zion Underground, Nisan Tavshin Hei, in the year 5705. In July 1946, Shamir was arrested again while walking in public in disguise. A British police sergeant, T.G. Martin, recognized him, although disguised by his bushy eyebrows. What do you think? That's this guy. There was a wanted poster all over Palestine. 3 people, one of whom was Shamir, Yitzchak Yezernitsky. Bushy? What do you think? 40 years later, bushy eyebrows? T.G. Martin recognized him by his eyebrows. He was interned in Africa, in Eritrea, by the British authorities. Lechi members subsequently tracked down and killed Martin, the guy who arrested him. In January 47, Shamir and 4 Irgun members escaped the British detention camp through a tunnel. There were a lot of prison escapes. Not only the Akko Fortress, we learned about that guy Eliezer Ben Ami that we just covered, and Avraham Stern. Through a tunnel they dug 200 feet in length, and they subsequently were hidden in an oil truck for 3 days. It was driven over the border to French Somaliland. Lechi sent him a forged passport with which he entered Israel. During the 48 War of Independence, most Lechi members, they closed down the Lechi, they closed down the Irgun, the underground stopped, and they joined the newly formed Israel Defense Forces. However, a small group of Lechi in Jerusalem did not close down. They continued functioning. And while the War of Independence was looming, it was this group in Jerusalem of Lechi, headed by Shamir, that decreed and carried out the assassination of Count Volker Bernadotte. We're going to learn about that. He was sent by the United Nations to Palestine to finalize. Really, he would have suffocated Israel. Israel never would have come to being if Count Volker Bernadotte's plans had come to fruition. We're going to learn about it next week. And Shamir gave the order to assassinate him, and he was. The Israeli Provisional Government declared Lechi a terrorist organization, imprisoned 200 of its members. They were soon after granted amnesty and given a state pardon. In 1955, 7 years after independence, he joined the Mossad, Shamir, and served 10 years. During his Mossad career, the Mossad, of course, is the Israeli CIA, only they do it better. He directed Operation Damocles, the assassinations of German rocket scientists working on Egyptian missile program. That's what Shamir was doing after the War of Independence. He was elected to the Knesset in 73 as a member of Menachem Begin's Likud. He became like the Speaker of the House, like Kevin McCarthy or Nancy Pelosi. He became Speaker of the Knesset in 77 and Foreign Minister in 1980. That's like the Secretary of State, like Blinken, or he served as Prime Minister of Israel from October 1983 after Begin resigned. There were want ads out for him. He became Prime Minister of Israel. For the last part of what we're going to do today, I prepared for you something really interesting. It might run us 10 minutes over. If it does, it won't be more than that. If you live in Irvine, you've probably never seen a real good Hachnasat Sefer Torah. If you're an Orthodox Jew and you are in an Orthodox community somewhere in Eretz Yisrael or in parts of Brooklyn or some other places like that, you've been to a real Hachnasat Sefer Torah. A Hachnasat Sefer Torah is when someone donates a Torah to a synagogue, and the big day comes of the dedication. The Torah normally is brought to the home of the donor by the scribe, the sofer who wrote it, and they leave several of the final letters of the Torah undone. And there's a big celebration, and people are given the opportunity to donate to tzedakah. Let's say $100 a letter. It's a big mitzvah once in your life to write a Sefer Torah. Most of us can't possibly do that. And so we fulfill the mitzvah by at least writing one letter in a Torah. So it's a big opportunity. You're at the big celebration of the donating of the Sefer Torah. Several letters have been left undone. The scribe is there to help you, has written the final letters in outline form, and people donate, let's say $100, $500, whatever it is, to buy a letter. And they sit with the scribe and he guides your hand while you're holding the quill with the special ink, and you fill in your letter. When the Torah is all done and all the letters are completed, They roll up the Torah, put on the cover, and they dance the Torah from the donor's house or some other such location to the synagogue or whatever location the Torah will remain. And they dance it in the street. There are dozens and scores of people, and they even bring a chuppah like a wedding. The Torah is a bride. I have for you a clipping with the last thing for today. A member of the Lechi, about 30 years later, or 40 years later, donated a Sefer Torah to an Israeli, I think an orphanage or some charity. He donated a Sefer Torah in memory of Yair Avraham Stern and Yitzchak Shamir, who had just died. So in memory of these two Lechi leaders, this Lechi person who successfully became a businessman after the underground battle to kick out the British, donated a Torah. And at this incredible dedication ceremony, the president of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, and the chief rabbi of Israel, Ashkenazic chief rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau were there. And they had a man you may recognize, maybe not. His name is Shuli Rand. Shuli Rand is an Israeli actor. He grew up as an Orthodox Jew, but as a late teenager, he got into acting classes and became an actor, and he gave up religion. And he devoted his life to acting. 10 or 20 years into his acting career, he found that his life was missing God. And he became religious. He became a chassid. He's an actor and a singer. Some of you may remember him from a scene for which he won Israel's Academy Award in the movie Ushpizin. He's the main guy. And this very early scene, it runs about 4 minutes, just to remind you who Shuli Rand is. He's very poor in the movie. He's poverty-stricken. They can't pay the rent, and the landlord's knocking on the door. And Sukkot is coming, Sukkot. They don't have money for food. They don't have money for rent. They certainly don't have money for an etrog or a lulav. And he and his wife are praying to God, we need the biggest miracle in the world. This is Shuli Rand, about 5 minutes of acting. And then we close right away with the Hachnat Sefer Torah, the ceremony in which that Torah was given in memory of Yitzchak Shamir and Avraham Stern. And in the background, Shuli Rand, the actor and singer, sings Chayalim Almonim, the anthem of the Lechi.
אגיד לך את האמת, ריבונו של עולם, המצב על הפנים. בסדר, אני יודע שאתה שונא עצבות, אבל אני... מה זה בעצבות? כולי עצבות. גוש של עצבות. יש לך שלום, אני חושב שמגיע לי משהו, ריבונו של עולם, לא מגיע לי כלום. אבל האמת, אני לא מבין. אני אגיד לך את האמת, אני לא מבין. לפעמים אני לא מבין מה אתה רוצה ממני, לפעמים נראה לי אתה הולך איתי קצת קשה מדי, קצת מחפש אותי.
הוא רוצה להחליט את תון לסף מזמור, קולי אל אלוהים וצעקה, קולי אל אלוהים ואזיל אליי. ביום צורתי אדוני דרשתי ידי לילה, אני גם לא תפוג, מנין לכם נפשי.
רוצה להיות יהודי קשה, אז זה מה אני רוצה, לא רוצה שום דבר יותר מזה. רוצה שיהיה לי סוכה, שיהיה לי לולב, שיהיה לי 4 מינים, שיהיה מה לאכול בחג, זה מה אני מבקש, זה לא בעיה גדולה בשבילך, נכון? אתה יודע מה, ואם לא בשבילי, בשביל אשתי, אני לא מבין, פייר, לא מבין, ריבונו של עולם, מה עשתה לך, מלכה בת מזה? מסכנה כמה היא אוהבת אותך, כמה היא מכבדת אותך, מה יש לה ריבונו שלה, מה יש לה ממני, מה אני מביא לה הביתה? כלום. תורה, איזה תורה אני מביא לה הביתה? כלום. פרנסה, ילד. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14,
היי, צביבו.
חילקת הכל?
כמעט הכל. יש אצלי $1,000.
איך זה?
היהודי המבוגר ממוסחרה שאני תמיד הולך אליו נפטר.
ידעתי, שכחתי להגיד לך. פורך דעין אמש.
אז הנה, $1,000. מה לעשות איתם?
אתה כבר תמצא למי לתת.
צביבו, אני רוצה לגמור עם זה, אני יורד למרכז היום.
בבקשה, תסתכל פה, בטח תמצא מישהו.
אני לא יודע.
תגיד מספר.
מה המספר?
תגיד מספר, נו.
אני יודע, 35.
תתחיל לספור.
1, 2.
ריבונו של עולם, אנחנו צריכים נס. נס, ריבונו של עולם, נס. בבקשה, נס, ריבונו של עולם. בבקשה, נס, ריבונו של עולם, נס.
רבנו הקדוש רבי נחמן מברסלב, ריבונו של עולם, בזכות הזכויות שלו, תשמע אותנו, תן לנו נס, אבא שבשמיים.
13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21.
נודע שרבצני על מי מנוחות נעלה.
נס, ריבונו של עולם, נס. נס. נס.
גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא ארע רעה, כי אתה עמדי.
משה בלנגה, מכיר?
כן, שמואל הנביא שמה.
כן, אני חושב שאני יודע מי זה.
ברסלבר.
טוב, אני הולך לשם עכשיו.
חיילים אלמונים הננו בלי מדים וסביבנו אימה וצל מוות כולנו גויסנו לכל החיים משורה משחרר רק המוות בימים אדומים של פרעות ודמים בלילות השחורים של ייאוש בערים בכפרים את דגלנו נרים ועליו הגנה וכיבוש לא גויסנו בשוט כהמון עבדים כדי לשפוך בנכר את דמנו רצוננו להיות לעולם בני חורים חלומנו למות בעד ארצנו בימים אדומים של פרעות ודמים בלילות השחורים של ייאוש בערים בכפרים את דגלנו נרים ועליו הגנה וכיבוש ומכל עברים רבבות מכשולים שם גורל אכזרי את דרכנו אך אויבים מרגלים ובתי אסורים לא יוכלו לעצור בעדנו בימים אדומים של פרעות ודמים בלילות השחורים של ייאוש בערים בכפרים את דגלנו נרים ועליו הגנה וכיבוש אם אנחנו ניפול ברחובות בבתים יקברונו בלילה בלט במקומנו יבואו אלפי אחרים ללחום ולכבוש עד היעד בימים אדומים של פרעות ודמים בלילות השחורים של ייאוש טהורים, כי במלט נדביק הגופות ללבנים, ובניין המולדת נקים. בימים האדומים של פרעות ודמים, בלילות השחורים של ייאוש, בערים בכפרים את דגלנו נרים, ועליו הגנה וכיבוש.
Thank you for being with us today. God willing, next week, we're going to go into this is something that is probably among the least known of the underground attacks, and one of the most important, the assassination of Count Volker Bernadotte. Very briefly, the United Nations, everybody grows up with the story about how the United Nations in November 1947 voted to have a state of Israel, like the UN was so wonderful, and there was a vote, and The United Nations was a tremendous, tremendous problem even then. Now, of course, it's the center of worldwide anti-Semitism. But even then, they had one more series of surprises left for Israel before the state became independent. Had the United Nations plan come to full fruition, the state of Israel never would have gotten off the ground. We're going to learn next week about what that was about. And they sent their most highly regarded, internationally famous negotiator, sort of like what Henry Kissinger became in the 1970s. Count Volker Bernadotte was internationally famous for negotiating compromises and deals. And he was sent to negotiate a deal between the Jews and the Arabs. And had his deal come through, there would have been no state. And he was determined that that was the deal. And Shamir was determined he's not going back home. And he did not come back home. And we're going to learn about it, God willing, next week. One of the most important things that ever happened, the assassination of Count Volker Bernadotte. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for being with all of these different classes. And I look forward to seeing all of you and others next week. Bye-bye.